Hey, so I'm going to try something new this weekend, and it's basically just a roundup of the four most important articles that I think maybe you should also check out this weekend. The first of those articles is at the LA Times by a writer named Matthew Ormseth, and it's all about this trial of three members of the Aryan Brotherhood who are alleged not only to have engaged in some pretty serious racketeering charges against the state of California, but who are also alleged to have ordered hits of their own Aryan brothers from within prison. And the reason I think that's such an important story to check out is because it's really a living, breathing example of the way that, even at its most logical conclusion, in a white only world for white supremacists, it has nothing to do with the white race or white manifest destiny, but everything to do with power, fear, and greed. Because if these allegations are proven to be true, then you really have a situation in which these brothers are not quite so with one another, after all, right? These Aryan brothers are, in fact, entirely interested in just their own gains, and instead of resolving disputes with each other, as brothers should or would do, they decide to order hits against one another, right? So I think that for anyone you know out there who's kind of on the verge or who doesn't know that they're on the verge of falling into these lines of thinking, that is, of thinking like a white supremacist out there because the election proved this, or it showed that there's a sort of veracity and a legitimacy to that way of looking at the world, that folks are maybe just looking out for their own. Guess what? Here is an example right in Fresno County, right in the state of California, that shows otherwise, right? Because at the end of the day, when there's not much else left to fight for, you just fight with your own people. Although in this case, when these three members of the Aryan Brotherhood ordered hits against their own, that wasn't even fighting. That was just resorting to a fascist takeout of their own people. So I think it's a great story, and I think you should totally check it out. And shout out to Matthew Ormseth for the coverage and the LA Times for putting this up. Let's get more of that out there, 100%. The second story that I think you should totally check out this weekend is once again from the LA Times by Matt Hamilton as well as David Zanizer, who write that the Los Angeles Department of Power and Electricity has now contracted a firm known as Munger, Tolles, and Olson and is paying them no less than $1,975 an hour to defend them against impending lawsuits by victims of the wildfires in Los Angeles from the Pacific Palisades. And not only is this story relevant for the numbers it brings to light, but it's also important because it shows that this law firm is the same one which defended PG&E in 2018 when it was found guilty of manslaughter against no less than 85 people during the Camp Fire which ravaged the city of Paradise. So, yeah, now LA is in the same position that state officials were in 2018 when they decided that the companies or those city officials or city institutions which are responsible for the care and well-being of their tax-paying citizenry, now we are defending against their claims and doing so at an exorbitant rate at that. It's an outrageous story, and it is a disgusting story, and yet it's also an important story to get into because, at the end of the day, it really gives you an opportunity to learn more about how the city of Los Angeles does business, especially with the LADWP. For example, did you know that the LA mayoral position gets to just appoint commissioners to the 5-member board at LADWP with little to no vetting by either the city council and much less the LA electorate. That's just how it's gone for decades on end, for longer than we have time to get into. And yet, I think we should totally bring this to light and let our people know, let the city know, in order to do better. Because it's way past due and because lives are literally on the line. Shout out to the LA Times and Matt Hamilton as well as David Zanizer for this story. Go check it out yourselves just as well. The third story I think you should totally check out this weekend is by Brittany Gibson at Axios, who writes that Trump's mass deportation plan hits its own wall. And for this, I'm just going to quote Gibson's words because the quotes are really the main goodies and they tell you just about as much as you need to know. So, quote, a lack of funds, detention space, officers, and infrastructure to handle arrested immigrants is frustrating many involved in the effort, and has made goals such as 1 million deportations this year seem unrealistic. That urgency led the White House to ask Congress for an immediate infusion of $175 billion to help immigration and customs enforcement acquire more detention space, boost staff, and address other needs, unquote. The article then goes on to capture this nugget from a Republican senator known as Tommy Tuberville, a Republican of the state of Alabama, who said, quote, at the end of the day, we've got to just spend money. Unfortunately, the American taxpayers are going to have to pay the bill on this, unquote. That's the story. I absolutely recommend that you go and check this out for yourself to read more because even with those golden nuggets, I do have to say there's an opportunity there just as well to learn more about where this all comes from, what it all actually boils down to when we talk about enforcement of any laws, let alone immigration laws, and then some. Shout out to Gibson, though, for really just selecting such great language for this. I gotta say, I laughed instead of crying, and I think you just may well too. Okay. The fourth and final cuento I think you should get into this weekend is by a writer named Yeva Nersisian, who wrote for The Hill that amid Democrats' soul searching, we need to rethink the Obama presidency. And Nersisian here writes very well about the way that Obama and Larry Summers handled the Great Recession, or the worst financial crisis globally since the Great Depression. I mean, Obama decided to rescue big banks and to rescue General Motors, but when it came to protecting homeowners and ensuring that we avoided as many mortgages going on default as we could, it suddenly was no longer a priority. It came down to this centrism that he really sort of gleamed, I suppose, from Bill Clinton and Clinton's kind of, down the road, really central right conservative fiscal policy. And so now, Nersisian makes the point that if the Democratic Party is to ever energize working class communities again, then it better start talking about policies for working class communities. And it better start talking seriously on those matters, right? I mean, it's one thing to call out the banks and to note that big banks and big pharma and these social media giants or industries like Google or AI are part of the billionaires class that we need to tax. And it's another thing to go full throttle against these industries in the interest of working class people. And if the Democratic Party doesn't get that, say goodbye to 2028 and who knows how much longer thereafter. That's it for now. Let the city know, let your people know. You already know.